Welcome to FailCraft, the podcast where we dive into the messy, real side of success and explore how setbacks become the stepping stones to growth and clarity. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today's guest is Lorie Kleiner Eckert. She's like that wise, witty friend who tells it like it is. She's an author, an artist, and motivational speaker who reinvented herself from from a stay-at-home mom to a creative powerhouse. But her journey wasn't a straight line. From navigating the loss of a significant other to rejecting the pressure of perfectionism, Lorie has learned to find joy in the messy middle of life. She called it being flawsome, flawed but awesome, and she's here to share how embracing our imperfections and small victories can help us rebuild after life's biggest transitions. So, Laurie, it's a delight to welcome you to Philcraft. Thanks for being here.
I am delighted to be with you, Ezekiel. Thank you, and thank you for the nice introduction.
All right, so let's get things started. Your new book is titled High on Life. Like you already told me, it doesn't really, sound just the way it's spelled. So you can maybe talk about that while answering the question. So, but your journey to get here involved some major pivots. You went from being a stay-at-home mom to a successful author and artist, navigating personal loss along the way. So, can you take us back to one of those specific moments of transition, maybe after a loss or when you first decided to reinvent yourself, where you felt completely stuck or unsure of your identity?
Sure. Yeah, I know my story, so I can tell you that. But you asked me to explain my book's title. So it's called High on Life. But if you're looking at it, it may not seem like that's what it's called because high is spelled Chai. And that's because it's a Hebrew root word, but it's pronounced high. If you've ever heard the toast when you're clinking wine glasses together that goes l'chaim, it means to life. So with this book, I'm kind of drinking a toast to a happy life. And yeah, my journey to get here has been a long one and an interesting one, and not at all where I thought it would take me. I do have a college degree in elementary education, but I got a degree because I got it as a fallback in case my someday husband someday died. I never intended to have a career. I was going to just be a stay-at-home mom like all of my relatives had been and were. And then after 21 years of marriage, oh my, I got divorced. And so I had to do something to support myself. And I decided that I would turn my hobby of quilt making into a paid profession and that I would make a series of quilts and go on the quilt lecture circuit, which really didn't exist. So if one wanted to speak to quilt groups, one had to call quilt groups and do cold calling and sell yourself to the quilt group and that kind of thing. But I didn't know that at the time. So I just started out to make this series of quilts. And that what was going to make me different from other quilt makers is I was making quilts that had words pieced into the design. And then my goal was to tell the story of the quilt, a story about my life, hoping that my audience members could glean life lessons from my stories. And the message that I came up with, which was the journey towards self-acceptance and love as you are reinventing yourself from the stay-at-home mom to a career woman, was a journey that a lot of people could relate to. So I didn't take it to quilt groups. I took it to every kind of group from PTAs to Procter and Gamble. And that series of quilts told about the journey towards self-acceptance and love, which is the journey I've been on for a long time. So then I created a book that was an adult picture book. It was short on words, long on pictures, and the pictures were my quilts. Audiences loved me, wanted me to come back, so I created another series of quilts with different words on them. I created a second book. So one thing led to another, and here I am 30 plus years later, still in the motivation field, still telling the stories of my life, hoping you can glean life lessons from them, still saying life is difficult, but you can do it. And I proudly have my 5th book in print, High on Life. It just came out in September. So it's been quite the journey.
Right, fantastic. Lorie, thanks for sharing that story. So I'd like to know what was the first step you took to move from that place of uncertainty to finding your creative voice, during that period of reinventing yourself and, transition for you.
Well, so I thought I was gonna go on the, quote, "quilt lecture circuit," which did not exist, so I had to make quilts. So I just started to make quilts, and I trusted myself. That was the main thing. I trusted myself. Whatever words that were running through my head, the idea that I wanted to talk about that I put on the quilts, I just made it. So I made a quilt that says, "Come as you are, you're lovely." I made a quilt that said, "Bloom." I made a quilt that said, "If not now, when?" And these are just the things that I needed to talk about, like, if not now, when? I was already 42 years old, and I'm just now entering the career world, so I really had to be serious about this. But I trusted myself. I made the quilts that my inner voice told me to make, and lo and behold, after making a dozen quilts, they all work together to tell one story. As I said, the journey towards self-acceptance and love. So, I had made these 12 quilts, but one day I woke up and a slightly more poetic version of the quilts was running through my head, and what it said and the verse started out, it said, "I love you is the sequel with acceptance and love of the self, the story that must come first. And toward the lofty goal of love, meaning loving yourself, I make these vows to myself." And then here come the quilts with the vows. Bloom. Come as you are, you're lovely. If not now, when? And so at that point, I realized that I wrote a book. I didn't really write the book. I made the quilts, but the book just kind of happened. And people have identified with that book because that's how life is. So, so I took the first step is what I did, and I kept taking steps. I gave myself a goal and I reached the goal. So I had thought if I made one quilt every 2 weeks, which is a really stiff goal, but I was making wall hangings. I wasn't making bed-size quilts. That if I made one every 2 weeks, at the end of 6 months, I'd have 12 quilts and I could take my show on the road. So that was a really stiff goal, but I did it. And I've done lots of things like that ever since. At this point in time, in the last about 5 years, I've written 168, I think, blog posts for my website. I've written over 200 book reviews for my website. That's a whole lot of writing, but it was all happened one at a time. Today, I'm gonna write a blog. Today I read a book, so I'm gonna write a book review. And I post it all on my website, and oh my gosh, my website became quite impressive, but it was built one step at a time.
Right, Lorie. So I read somewhere where you wrote about rejecting perfectionism for good enough. So in that transition period, where was there a specific failure or flaw you had to embrace to keep moving forward?
Yeah, so again, my MO in everything, whether I was talking about quilts or what I write about in my Slice of Life blogs, is to tell the stories of my life. So this is such a mundane story that caused me to reject perfectionism. And it has to do with making chicken soup for one of the Jewish holidays. You always make matzo ball soup, and so it's in a chicken soup base. But I had made chicken soup for years for my family, and I had done it a very simple method, and within 2 hours, I had chicken soup. But then my daughter got a very fancy cookbook from America's Test Kitchen, I think it's called, and I thought, "Okay, I'm gonna make chicken soup their way." And so I did, and it was so impossibly difficult to do. So, for instance, instead of me, I started with a whole chicken. This recipe said, "Take chicken legs and chop them with a meat cleaver into 2-inch pieces, and then fry them one by one in the frying pan, and then wait for their juices to release, and then it took forever. Plus, you're working with all these little bitty pieces of chicken that you then have to bone and save the meat and all this kind of stuff. It was very labor intensive. And the end result was, I don't want to make chicken soup anymore. This is just too hard. So that was when I learned the lesson, don't mess with success. I already had a chicken soup that everyone loved that I could make in 2 hours, and good enough is good enough. So again, very mundane. This is not rocket science. This is just a lady in the center of the United States living life and taking life lessons from it. My greatest, compliment from people is that they identify with my stories. Maybe it wasn't making chicken soup that they made to be so difficult in life, but something else. And so they can laugh at me for my ridiculousness, but also see their own ridiculousness and change their evil ways, make things easier.
All right. So, Lorie, you are a vocal advocate for therapy. So, did therapy help you navigate the messy middle of your invention when maybe your friends or family didn't quite get it?
Yeah, I am a vocal advocate for therapy, but what? I had a friend who said to me once, "You have to tell every story twice." And I said, "That's really not true. I have to tell every story 3 or 4, maybe 5 times. But clearly, you're not a person who can listen to me." So that's where a therapist comes in handy, is a paid professional friend. And so I don't feel like anything's wrong with having a paid professional friend. And so indeed, I saw the therapist that I saw, I don't remember, for over 20 years. And the only reason we stopped seeing each other is because she retired. And by the time she retired, I had her built into my brain. I knew what she would say in any given instance. And she was really, after all those years, just a very dear friend who listened to all of my problems, and I never listened to one of hers. So I think I always say life is difficult, but you can do it. But I always acknowledge that life is a challenge. And if you need help with the challenge, I am a strong advocate of going to a therapist. So you start with your doctor, and maybe your doctor, your general practitioner, maybe they'll give you some kind of a antidepressant or anti-anxiety drug. Great, take it. If that doesn't help, ask that doctor to refer you to another doctor. I just think it's so important. And so I do write about that. I wrote about the chicken soup story in High on Life, and I wrote about seeking professional help. When I first went to the therapist, it was because my 14-year-old son was driving me crazy, and he was not on drugs, he was not drinking, he was not flunking out of school, he was not getting in trouble with the law. What was making me crazy is that he and his friends were going shopping at the mall at rush hour, and they needed me to come pick them up when I needed to be cooking dinner. And as I wrote about that story in High on Live, I apologized to all of the women who are not stay-at-home moms, and on top of everything else, they have to go to work. I apologize to all the women who have non-reliable cars. I apologize to all the women who who don't have money to buy gas to go pick up their kid at the mall. So I realized that I'm very fortunate in many ways, and yet that was just a huge problem for me, that this kid needed to be picked up at rush hour at the mall. And so having a therapist talk to me about very, again, mundane, not life-threatening issues was very helpful. But then, of course, by the time I reached the point where I was going through divorce, or reached the point where my father was dying, my much beloved father was dying, I had this paid professional friend there at the ready who knew me inside and out, and it was a wonderful gift to have her. So yes, I am a very vocal advocate for therapy, and it sure beats what happened to Anthony Bourdain, who, is a suicide, unfortunately. Who his life looked like he had everything. What happened? So don't go there. Call the suicide prevention hotline. Call your doctor. Get help if you need it. And if you don't need it, hey, good for you. But I did. But since I retired from talking with my therapist, I've been doing it on my own for probably 10 years already. And here I am.
Wow, wow, wow. Really beautiful response there. You have you coined this very interesting word, flawsome. So what's the biggest flaw you've learned to love about yourself through your journey of reinvention?
Yeah. So yes, when you're flawsome, you realize that you're flawed, but that you're still awesome. And really, when I meet a new person, I often think, aren't they just so lucky to meet me? I'm such a neat person. And as I reveal myself to them and they get to know me, I think I am really very weird. And what do they want to deal with me? But so I do recognize my flaws. I do recognize that I have to tell every story 5 times. I do recognize that I needed psychological help because my 14-year-old son needed me to drive him home from the mall. These are flaws of mine. I'm not as strong as I might be. I fall apart under simple circumstances, but I'm also awesome. I'm human. We're all human. We all struggle. Life is difficult. You can do it. So that is really one of the things I want people to know is that they're awesome just the way they are. And when I worked as a motivational speaker and I would show that quilt that says, "Come as you are, you're lovely," I would say, I usually had women's wellness audiences. I would say, you don't have to lose 10 pounds first. You don't have to hide the gray. You don't have to dye your hair to hide the gray. You don't have to buy a new wardrobe. You're beautiful as you are right now. And that's my message. And then I also have to say that a very wise guru, no, it wasn't Wayne Dyer, it was Richard Bach. He's the guy who wrote the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull. He said that we tend to teach best that which we most need to learn. So as I am teaching these things to others, that you're awesome just the way you are, even with all your flaws, that's really what I'm trying to learn too. So I'm not an expert. I'm a fellow traveler on the journey. Yeah, yeah. I'm also flawsome and awesome.
It's great. After reinventing yourself multiple times and finding joy in the everyday. So, what does being successful truly mean to you now?
Yeah, well, this is a little bit of a reinvention from when we went through the pandemic. And so being successful to me right now means that I am doing meaningful work, which I am. I continue to write. But more than that, or included in that, is also having a full life. So I have lots of friends. I have lots of family nearby. I 3 adult children and 10 grandchildren, and they all live within a 5-mile radius of my house. So it's the whole picture. It's the balance of it all. Perhaps in some years of my life, spent too much time being a career person and not enough time being a babysitter person for grandchildren. Again, there's a story about that in in High on Life. But that's okay. Even, that's a flaw from the past, and I can't change the past, but I can do things differently now. And the bottom line for me is when they write my name on a tombstone, it isn't going to have below it bullet points of all of my successes. I was a motivational speaker. I wrote 5 books. Whatever. None of that is going to be on my tombstone. What's going to be there is that I was a good friend and a good mother, and my grandma name is Marmal, that I was a good Marmal. And that's what it boils down to. So, but I couldn't do just that. I still need to do meaningful work, and I love my writing, so I continue to.
All right, Laurie. So, finally, for our listeners who want to connect with you, learn more about you, or read High on Life, so where is the best place for them to go?
Yeah, everything about me is on my website, which is my full name, LorieKleinerEckert.com. But if you're looking for me on Facebook, or if you're looking for me on Amazon or on Barnes& and Noble or on Instagram, I'm Lorie Kleiner Eckert everywhere. But my website is a lot of fun, so you'll find lots of slice of life stories. You'll find over 200 book reviews of contemporary books, so lots of fun things to see. And also writing prompts that associate with the new book, High on Life. Every week I'm putting out writing prompts so that you can go there and you can kind of explore your life so that you can do some journaling with some directed prompts with love from me to you. So yeah, so look for me at LorieKleinerEckert.com.
Great. Lorie, this has been such a warm and encouraging conversation, and I'm excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you. It has been a delight. You're very easy to talk to. Thank you for that.